So today we have a special guest. It's Zaid, who's doing some writing. Hi, Zaid. Doing some
Hi.
writing with for Stitchdown. And actually, you want to just give us like a couple sentences about what you're doing over there?
Yeah, so like Phil said, I'm a writer for Stitchdown. I've been working on all sorts of articles as well as like covering the sort of weekly roundups lately. So if you don't know, Stitchdown does a roundup every week of all the like new cool boots and shoes that came out. And then also like some other stuff, interviews with bootmakers or people that are getting into the space. We have been working on some stories with tanneries. We've got a Horween story coming up, which is actually what this was originally planned for. Yeah.
Right. So that cutting to the chase here is Zaid reached out and Ben reached out asking if I could provide some resources for Horween leather and to sort of explain to Zaid so he could write an article about this. I mentioned it to Nick. I thought it'd be a good idea to make it into a full podcast. So we're thinking today might just be called The Boot Wearer's Guide to Horween Leather. So I'll let you take it away from here, Zaid. Where do you want to start?
So basically, my goal was hopefully just to go through like a couple of the kind of biggest leathers that we've seen kind of in the boot space. And this will be kind of fun because like Nick, you actually like know what the numbers are on what you guys are running. If there are leathers we missed, if you guys are like, actually we're running, thousands of whole cut Oxfords worth of basketball leather, like let us know. But I was hoping to just kind of start going through in order with like some of the really well-known stuff and then kind of go through from there to use that as kind of a touch point. Cordovan. Viscid Chrome Excel are going to be one of the ones where like a lot of people have heard a ton of the stuff that's really common in copy and some of that like, pit tanned in a process that takes a total of 6 months using every floor of the Horween tannery. So just to start us off, Nick, what don't people know about cordovan?
Yeah, I mean that one's been covered a lot, but it's our original product. So that's the only thing that we've made since our founding. So in 1905, we first opened. That was the only thing that we made, and we started to branch out a little bit, like within a decade. But that's really, I mean, our level of expertise in that product is, I mean, that's what we have the most experience with. So Phil knows working there. I mean, it's one of those things where someone comes in and they'll be like, well, why don't you try doing it this way? And it's like, just go work on something else, because like, we're not going to change it because we're sort of fanatical about not changing it. So it's a super traditional product. We did a podcast a while ago, and I actually went back through again, like all the formulations to see like what exactly had changed. And like, it's not really anything, especially on the tanning side. I mean, the finishes have changed a little bit just because people use water-based stuff now, but that's everywhere in the world. But yeah, I mean, it's like you said, it's 6 months, start to finish. It's a horsehide product, which I think people that are listening to this probably know by now. And it has to be made out of horsehide because the horse hide itself has these two shells or structures that sit over the butt of the animal that then can be turned into, over that lengthy process, into the cordovan product. And it's a pure veg, pit tanned, aniline finished, hot stuff. I mean, it's like all the old fashioned buzzwords are in that product. And I think that, I mean, maybe something that people don't realize is that it's not, so it's, once it's in a product, it lasts forever, but getting it even from the table, like into a finished shoe is not an easy task. I mean, it doesn't really want to be made into anything. I mean, for the lack of a better description, because it's just, I mean, it's nice to cut, right, Phil? Like, it's nice to click it and it's nice to cut it with a knife, but when you try to skive it or stitch it or heat it or mold it, like, it kind of fights you at every turn.
That's
but
right.
The reward is definitely worth the price. So I think that part of and people look at the leather and they're like, oh, it's so expensive because the leather is so expensive. And that's true. It definitely is expensive because the pieces are small and it takes a long time to make. But also it's not easy to work with either. So I think maybe that gets forgotten a little bit or isn't mentioned enough, but yeah, I don't know. I'm not quite sure if there are any specific questions that have come up. I mean, it's been documented quite a bit, but I don't know sort of what the word on the street is at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So if I've got sort of my facts in order, basically one of the reasons it takes so long to tan, right, is that it's really, really dense. I think the numbers you gave us for an article we wrote a couple of years back was that it's something like 8 to 10 times denser than like a standard cowhide. That, if I understand it right, is also sort of why it behaves in ways like rolling instead of kind of the tight creasing you see where when the grain layer separates on another layer. What does that look like, Phil, when you're working with it? Like, how does that change? I know Nick mentioned already a little bit of the ways that makes it more difficult, but what does that change handling it and making something out of it?
Well, I think it's actually really interesting to examine why it does not develop any creasing. And that's because, like you mentioned, it's sort of a typical creasing effect, or that break that many people call it, where your foot flexes and then you start to see like either fine or coarse piping or pebbling where your toe flexes. That is because the grain layer starts to separate from all the fibers below it on most leathers. However, on the cordovan, it's very unique where it does not have a grain layer to separate it at all. So because of that fact, you'll never see any of that delamination effect unless there's been, I know a lot of other tanneries apply finishes over the tops of the shell. So you might start to see some finish break, it's called, that looks like very fine pebbling, which is really just that finish layer starting to separate from the shell below. So I think that fact is completely fascinating, and that's why cordovan is very unique. And to Nick's point, it tends to retain that appearance for a very long time, if not for, I guess you'd have to really cut through it or something before you would lose that appearance, but it will retain that smooth, shiny appearance essentially for as long as you live. But in terms of working with it, Nick keyed on this as well, but the density is an issue because the shell itself is found at random depths within the skin, which is another challenge for the tannery. So they have to essentially shave down to that dense fiber layer by feel, and it occurs and exists at different depths within the skin. Even within the hide, the same hide itself, it will occur in different depths. It's pretty crazy. And for the same thing in crafting, that density becomes a challenge, especially the random density. So it will go from it's a good example. Like imagine you're cutting a watermelon, right? And the rind is like pretty tough, but then the pulp inside the flesh inside is very, very easy to cut. It's kind of like that, but you can't see it. So when you're going to skive or split or thin down a section of shell, there's a good chance that your blade may hit something that is inconsistently dense and makes your blade sort of shimmy. So it can be a challenge to figure out your settings for your machine to work with it in that way. And that was sort of what Nick was saying. It really wants to not be cut in terms of being thinned down. But everything else is really, really nice about it. It tends to not stretch very much. The density is nice to work with. For other reasons, it's sometimes hard to sew and construct things out of very soft leather where the shell has a really nice amount of stand to it. But other thing for your first question earlier, thing I think people don't know about cordovan is it was not originally made for shoes. It just is an accident. At least at Horween, it's sort of an accident that it's turned out to be an amazing product for shoes. It was originally made for razor strops for honing straight razors. And then it just so happened that it was breathable and bright and shiny and retained that smooth appearance for footwear. I suppose that the tannery being located in the same city of Chicago here that Florsheim was located in back in 1909 is when you started selling to Florsheim, Nick? Something like that?
Oh, yes. I think it's, 9, 10, 11, 12, like in there, yeah.
It's just it was fortuitous that the tannery was next to the shoemaker that was willing to take a chance and just started making stuff out of it. And that's why all those gunboats started happening, and you got all the long wings from Florsheim that were really hip back then. And I just think that story is amazing. I don't know if many people know that.
Yeah, the stropping thing is interesting. And I think the horse hides themselves had been used for stuff other than just stropping. They were used, the cordovan itself was, at least from us, was being used for straps, but in other parts of the world at other times it was used for other stuff too. But but the same things that made it good for a razor strap made it good for boots. You know, super dense, not stretchy, water tolerates water and abrasion really well. So yeah, I mean, it was an easy. It wasn't like a long leap.
Here's my question to you, Nick. If
Yep.
you were going to tell somebody the reason to spend all the premium that it costs for a cordovan boot, what would the reasons be?
I'm just trying to be succinct in my answer. I mean, it goes back to, I mean, the answer is sort of the same for a lot of different leather items, I think. And it's one that we talk about all the time for. It's like a cordovan shoe to me, and this people have different opinions about this, but like the worst it's going to look like is that when it comes out of the box. Like as soon as you start to wear it, like every single day, and the more it becomes yours, like the better it looks. To the point where like you've got a shoe and it's 15 or 20 years later. I mean, that's like sort of the best looking cordovan shoe to me. So it's an investment in a product that's going to be with you for a long time, and it's going to change, and it's going to get more beautiful as you use it. So I mean, that's a big selling point to me.
But you're saying that's not unique necessarily to cordovan?
It's not unique to cordovan, but it's like even applies even more to that, because it's sort of like the most extreme example of that, where you know, going back to the rolling. I mean, it develops that roll, which is something that you sort of earn that over time, and you, by polishing it and wearing it and polishing it and wearing it, you develop this really interesting character. It's really unique to that product. You know, the color change over time is very dynamic because of the tree barks that are in it and the dyes that are used, and you know how it responds to water and weather and everything. It's a living product to not mean to be a little bit cheesy about it, but and you know, and leather like that, you know, high quality leather like that is or high quality leather is like that in general, I think. But it's just, like I said, it's even more true when you're talking about something like shell cordovan.
Well, and to your point about the Florsheim, I mean, there are like lots of those gunboats from like 50 or 60 years ago that you'll find. I mean, people find them in like vintage stores all the time, where the outsoles are totally worn through, the welts are worn out, the insoles are shot, but the uppers are just pristine, and all it takes is like basically a little bit of brushing, and they're like back in good shape. So to sort of hold you over the fire a little bit, Nick, as we've already talked about for all the reasons we mentioned, cordovan's pretty different from like just about any other leather you're going to find on a boot upper. Why might somebody not want to opt for kind of a shell cordovan boot or shoe for some of those reasons? Just because I think a lot of people out there, especially that are like into the like heritage boot space or maybe new to it, kind of see it as like the final boss leather, where it's just like unilaterally an upgrade. Whereas like in reality, it has a lot of really, really amazing properties, but it's also a very different beast to like a standard cowhide upper leather.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's sort of how, like, so, you know, what style is it in, and how do you want to wear it, and how healthy is your pocketbook, I guess? Because it's expensive. I mean, that's like I think for a lot of people, that's the main barrier, is like, you know, you go, you know, do you want to spend 800 plus on a pair of shoes? I mean, is that sort of in the cards, especially if you're starting out on your boot or shoe or wallet journey, whatever? I mean, a lot of times people don't sort of want to take that plunge right away, I think, which is understandable. So there's that. I do think, to me, even though you can wear it casually, I mean, you can not polish it and let it get matte, and I think it looks great. The general consensus is that it's not. I mean, it's not a dressed calf necessarily, but it's a dressier. I think people mostly wear it on the dressier side. So, and again, I don't think you have to do that, but I think that the price along with the look sort of lends itself into a dressier sort of category, which limits it a little bit too, especially as people get dressed up less and less. There's that. And then, you know, it's a veg, so you can't totally abuse it the way you can abuse something like a chrome pack, because it just doesn't have quite the physical characteristics. And that's true of all vedges. Just, you know, we talked about this with Esteban in the last episode. You're think about it's wood or tree bark based instead of like mineral or metal based, in the case of something that's chrome tanned. So it's a little bit different that way. Yeah, I mean, color choices, you're limited to earth tones. So if you want something bright color, I mean, you have to look somewhere else. And yeah, and it's dense, so it can be heavy in terms of weight, but that has a lot to do with the construction, because since it's hot stuff, you have to welt it or stitch it or mechanically fasten it somehow. So that just lends itself to a heavier construction. And
It's
yeah, I mean, I think
expensive.
that's, yeah, we started with that.
Yeah.
So I think it has a place, and it works wonderfully in a lot of different places, but you don't go and say, oh, I have a pair of cordovan shoes and a pair of cordovan boots. I can sell everything else. That's not it doesn't work that way.
So I think kind of moving on to a leather that might not be as well known, but that I wanted to talk about next because it's pretty closely related. We're taking the Horsebutts, we're leaving in the cordovan, but we're tanning it all the way through as the full thickness leather. Work shoe butt.
Okay.
Do I have the process basically correct?
Yeah, in a nutshell. I mean, it's
I'm actually impressed because it's not simple to understand what you just said. So you have some understanding, of course. I'm impressed.
Yeah, it's good. It's good too to get the horse butt stuff out of the way or do it together, because I run into this problem when I give tours, because it's the tour, you jump back and forth between like veg tan, cordovan, and then like chrome tan, chrome XL, and you're walking through it and it looks kind of similar and it smells kind of similar, but they're like completely different worlds. So you're getting 2 or 3 tours at once when you come through our place, and it's not linear anyway. So it's complicated. So anyway, good idea to go to that next, I guess. That's what I'm saying. But yeah, so the work shoe butt, I mean, chrome XL is how most of it is these days, almost all of it.
Can you help us separate those two ideas out though, Nick? Or those two concepts?
The difference between regular shell cordovan.
Yeah. Maybe I'll just do it, because there's a tannage component and then a hide component. So you can take a tannage and apply it to different types of hides. So you can do a chrome XL bison, chrome XL horsebutt, chrome XL steer hide, which is the most common. Or alternatively, you could take, I think we're going to talk about predator later. We can do a predator horsebutt in theory, right? So separating out the hide from the tannage, I think is confusing to a lot of people. Because a lot of people come to me saying, like, give me the horsebutt leather. And I'm like, okay, what tannage do you want? They're like, what's a tannage? So it's tremendously confusing.
Yeah. Yeah, the work shoe butt is even more, the whole horse butt is even more confusing, because it's sort of a backwards product where it gets pit tanned. The whole horse butts get pit tanned all the same way for the first 30 days. And they're big and they haven't been shaved at all. And that's just the initial tan, just 30 days, and they come out, and that's sort of, they're preserved at that point, but we haven't made them into anything usable yet. They still have to be retanned, which happens in the case of cordovan in the pits, which is sort of like a little bit of a weird thing to think about. But in the case of work shoe butt chrome XL, after the first 30 days, that product is done in the pits. And the next steps, we just start to then treat it like chrome XL, with the exception that we add chrome to it in the retanning process, which is like flip-flopped normally. Yeah. Because normally chrome XL gets the chrome base tannage and then the vegetable retannage in the drums. And it's happening backwards in the case of work shoe butts, which has the effect of making it stronger and more heat resistant than regular shell cordovan, but at the same time lower in chrome than regular chrome XL. So it's kind of like a halfway in between. And by doing that, you get sort of something that's in between. You get something that's stronger, but has the grain character of horsehide. And also the shells, as you mentioned, are still in the hide. We don't expose them, but they're in there. So you get that extreme density, which really helps with the longevity of something like a boot, because you've got so much more stuff, hide substance in there, just in terms of density.
So with these combination tannages, like regular chrome XL is going to be like cowhide chrome XL, a chrome tannage, and then a veg retannage later, whereas this is kind of flipped. Is that first tannage just what's giving you like the bulk of the tannins, whereas like a leather that's tanned chrome first is going to be more like a full chrome tan leather rather than a full veg tan leather? Or what does the kind of swapping that order do to the final product?
It depends. I guess is the answer.
That's a good question.
It's like, yeah, it is. It depends. There's a lot that we can do in any stage in terms of what we're introducing and how we're introducing it and how long we're introducing it for. We've tried running the workshoe butts differently. We can put them in the pits for the second 30 days and take them out and then do the same thing, or we can run them with no chrome and see how they look. I mean, in this, you sort of end up at a point that gives you the best sort of combination of characteristics. And over the years, the many, many years that we've been running that product, I mean, this is just sort of the best blend of all of the options. Yeah, I mean, that's not great. That's not a very exciting answer, but that's the answer.
Well, in the case of the workshoe Chrome Excel Horsebutts, which is again a ton of words.
It's a mouthful, yeah.
By tanning it first in the pits, I think you're going to get a little bit more density as opposed to chrome tanning it and then veg retanning it. I don't suppose you'd get as much of the tree bark fill in a drum as you would in a month in a pit. You know what I mean?
Different, yeah. Yeah, I mean, you can use I mean, the action is way different. So it's a lot friendlier on the hide itself to just sit and sort of steep in the liquor than it is to put it in a drum for 6 hours and run it like a washing machine. So it's a lot gentler on the leather. I mean, it's not to say you can't do that because we do it all the time. It's just if you're not going to put it in a drum for 2 weeks and try to get something as dense as possible. But again, would we get a more dense finished product if we put it in the pits for like another 15 days? Like, yeah, I mean, maybe a little, but I mean, at a certain point, it's you're just trading off time and materials, and the benefit might not be appreciable, especially in terms of whatever cost is associated with it. So,
or making it into a shoe, right? It could be inflexible, if that's a word. You just couldn't turn it into a shoe.
Yeah, it's one of these things where I guess maybe my shortcoming as a leather person, as a tanner, is that being around these products, they've just been the same way for such a long time. And I feel like my ancestors were so much smarter than me with all this stuff. So it's like I sort of just like accept it because I've seen, like, we've got like books, like old handwritten ledgers of different formulation trials that say like hands off, and there are all these like not millions, but scores of different, like, well, what if we run it with this temperature water for this long and this concentration of this oil and that tree bark? And there have been so many different combinations that have been tried and that's really the only way to do it, is you have to try it out and then you have to see how it looks. And if it looks good on the table and the physicals are good, then you have to make it into a shoe and you have to see how that works. And so it's like, it's a very long process, especially when you're talking about something that, like in the case of cordovan, is 6 months, or workshoe butts is, 4 months, 3.5 months, at least. So it's to go all the way through that and then to get something that's not any good is pretty depressing. So, so yeah, those products have not changed a lot. So the reason to do them that way is just because they've been done that way, and the trials have been done, the experience is there, which is, again, not a very exciting answer, but it's the answer.
Well, every time we've done this podcast, it makes me, like, the more and more we do these, it makes me realize that I'm less smart and clever than I thought, because every time we bring up a question like this, it's like, well, they tried that 100 years ago, and there's a reason that they've done these things the way they're doing. So it seems like that happens every time we do an episode, Nick.
It does happen, especially with those products. It does. With something like Predator, when we get to that, like, that's a different, like, there's a lot more there, and a lot more that can be done because it's a completely different set of inputs and different philosophy.
Can I give you my headline for workshoe Chrome Excel Horsebutt?
Please do.
For me, it's the most intense version of Chrome Excel. In a wallet, which is a lot of my experience, it's the best wearing leather I've come across. And I think it has to do with that density. As you wear the thing, it just really continues to become more and more compact, and super, super smooth, despite having that grain layer where shell cordovan does not. So extra dense, really grainy, it just wears in. I hate to just use superlatives and say like, it's amazing, but for me, it's the best wearing version of Chrome Excel that I have come across. I just love it.
Do you think, are you talking about the full grain version or the regular version?
Full grain version. Well, let's talk about that. So what's the regular version?
Well, the regular version is polished. So it has pull up like regular Chrome Excel does. But it looks different because it's horsehide versus steer.
Okay, so what do you call the full grain one?
I mean, it's just crust. I mean, we don't really sell it that way.
Oh, why? I bought it. I have some black mill-dyed Chrome Excel Horsebutt that has like a finish over it. I think this is like, was it work boot Chrome Excel? Is that the difference?
And we've done some trials that way, but we did. There was a batch that we ran because, sometimes we don't run it. We're not really running it at all right now because everything that we're running into cordovan right now. But yeah, we would get it because we did some mill dyed and we did some color 8 mill dyed, or I'm sorry, black mill dyed and color 8 mill dyed versions of that. And we tried, when we run stuff like that, we want to try to be efficient. And we're like, oh, we'll sell these. So we run it full in terms of weight inside the mill, whatever mill size that is. And I think we ran extra than we needed for some of the regular stuff. And it just sat around full grain for a while. And I think that's probably what you ended up with.
It's awesome.
Was an extra, like an overrun that we then just left that way. It is awesome as long as you can tolerate the cosmetic nuances that come along with horsehides, because that's one of the hardest things about the work shoe. But whatever we're making out of that is that we have to flip it over and look at it that we don't normally look at and make sure it's not so cut up that you can't make anything out of it. Because horsehides in general, selections are, when I say selection, that just means like the cosmetic quality of the surface. They're always they have much more markings. It's like almost like people are familiar with like kudu, with like the antelope, which always has a ton of that. It's not quite that extreme, but it's like, it's getting there. I've seen some that are like that. It's a challenge. Yeah.
I used to tell your dad that it was a mistake to make Chrome Excel horsebutts, and having actually experienced it myself, I regret saying that, because I used to think it was sort of a waste of the shell, because that shell could only that's the only thing that is made how you make cordovan. Like you can't do vice versa, right? So it's like, well, like if that's the only way to make cordovan, why would you waste any of it for not cordovan? Cordovan's so great. I think people, if you ever are able to make it again, Nick, people should not sleep on the work shoe Chrome Excel Horsebutt.
Well, you can, yeah. So we're not making it now, but we are making the Chrome Excel horse strips, which is the same product, just with the shell cut out of it. So it's a smaller piece because we've removed the shells, and those have been tanned in the pits and done the normal shell cordovan thing for us. But then we take whatever was attached to the shell, which we call the strip, and that can be tanned a couple of different ways. But we oftentimes, especially the bigger ones, will tan them into Chrome Excel, which is identical to the work shoe, but Chrome Excel, other than the shells aren't there. So if people want to experience that product and they can't find it because we're not making it, there are places that get it, like Wesco and Brian the Bootmaker Roll Club, and I should know more names, but I just can't think of them. But there's a lot of the Pacific Northwest guy, I think White's and
it's awesome.
We can put them in the notes. I'm just blanking because I'm tired, but but that's a really good way, and it ends up being more reasonably, it's more reasonably priced when it leaves us by the foot, but it's harder to work with because it's smaller. So it might end up being the same, but yeah, it's a good option.
It's more dense. I think it's better personally, but I think it's up to you.
Yeah, it's just different. The grain looks way different too when it ages. Yeah.
But that takes us back around to something that I actually wanted to ask about, because like with the strip, right? That's the part, like you said, that is getting cut off when you're selling the final cordovan, which is just like usually a square foot, 2 square feet, kind of in that range. With the work shoe butts, you're getting sort of that full piece that would become the cordovan and the strip.
Mm-hmm.
So from a consumer angle, I think a lot of the marketing copy that people use when they run work shoe butt leans really, really hard into like the cordovan is still in the leather, right? And so you're getting like, in a sense, you're getting cordovan in your work shoe butt, but that's not necessarily the case depending on how it's clicked. What kind of square footage are you guys usually running on the work shoe butt panels? Like what fraction of that butt is actually like has the cordovan layer in there?
The answer is it's different for everyone. So generally, I mean, the work shoe butts are a challenge for the cosmetic reasons, but also for the size reasons. Because if it's, I mean, we source horse hides from places that we've done business with for a long time, because that's, you know, you want to make sure that things are coming to you in a reasonable, responsible way. But also because we're looking for the biggest, thickest horse hides that we can get, because those give, you know, yield the biggest, thickest shells. So generally we get big hides and we're looking at those, or as big as the biggest we can find. But sometimes you get smaller hides too. And those kind of get disqualified as work shoe butts because there's not a lot of footage there. But it just depends, because they're all different size, and you know the shells are all different sizes. So the proportion of shell to non-shell in the work shoe butt is different. I mean, you could have an enormous work shoe butt that could have little tiny shells in it, just based on, you know, the raw material, or vice versa. You could have one that's really small, you know, or relatively small compared to the one we just talked about, and the shells could be super thick and almost the entire thing. So it's very variable, but you know, generally the shells are, you know, 1.5 to 2 feet is sort of probably the average that we would like. And so figure 4 feet, you know, 3 to 4 feet in shells, and probably another about the same in terms of the strip. So it's about half and half. I mean, it might be more or less in both ways, or both at the same time based on the size, but it just depends. And the conventional wisdom was, I mean, if you click a boot out, it's not going to all have shell in it. But the traditional idea was try to use the dense part for the parts of the boot or product that are going to be doing the most work.
Yeah, I've seen like a lot of makers that like have run work shoe butt in the last couple of years will click the shell onto the vamp. So when you're getting that break, it rolls like shell cordovan would, and use sort of the less dense parts for kind of the like back of the boot and the upper panels, where you're not going to be flexing as much and there's not going to be as much pressure. So if it's definitely like, if it's 50-50, because I didn't know those proportions, then that's definitely like pretty heavy inclusion. Probably like you're going to see some of it on most pairs.
It might be a little bit heavy. It might be, as a general statement, it might be a little bit more shell than non-shell, like maybe 60-40 or something. But again, it could totally, it just depends. I mean, it could be.
Honestly, it depends on where you crop the hide when you separate the front from the butt, which actually we used to do more cropping. When I was working for Nick, we would sort of moderate the cropping part to give a larger butt or a larger front, depending on what the demand was in the world at the time. So
based on orders. Yeah.
If you got a
ton for jackets, and not a lot of strips, we would trim further down closer to the shell. So we'd end up with a smaller strip. And then, because we sell that product generally by the pound if we're not making it into Chrome XL or work shoe butt. But you know, if the demand for strips was higher, which it is a time, and there's not a lot of demand for jackets. Sorry to cut you off, Phil.
No, it's just
we would switch sort of where we're cutting it. But
I just wanted
it's not a big difference, but yeah.
I'm going to expose you and all the other horse butt tanneries, because it's like, when is it not a horse butt, right? Like, how far up do I have to crop it before it is no longer a horse butt, right?
I mean, it's a weight thing. I mean, you're limited. I mean, if you're doing it the right way, I mean, the weight starts to fall off, especially in the margins on the sides. So you can't go.
Where does your butt end, Nick?
Just cut off, like just just below my just like just out of the frame.
Right here, like right here.
Yeah.
But no, like I think that's an interesting thing to talk about because you know they can call a horsebutt and it's like kind of like part of the front sometimes maybe, but that's also like where the awesome patterning comes, that sort of spiderwebby look. Sometimes you see that more up towards the front of the animal. So I think what people really like in horsebutt is that sort of spiderwebby thing. They also like the notion of having a shell in there. But I think sometimes you can't, if you flip the leather upside down, like on a Chrome Excel horsebutt, for example, you can kind of see some of where the shell is, but sometimes you can't see it at all. So a bootmaker telling you like, I 100% cut this all shell on the horsebutt, it's like, there's really like not a way for them to like fully know that. They can say like, to the best of my knowledge, it's a shell, but like, I don't know if they could fully tell you it's all shell without shaving.
I would say on a lot of them, you can if you flip it over, you can see where the shell is. Yeah, it depends on the weight that's being ordered, which we don't really even allow people to specify because the weight with anything shell related is sort of the weight is the weight. But yeah, you can tell a lot, and just by the they'll look by how it cuts and skives. I mean, you can tell pretty well. I mean, not like you're gonna like, oh, there's no shell in this, I'm gonna throw this one in the garbage necessarily. But
I guess that's my point, is like I can tell as a maker, and I've made some horsebutt stuff that I know does not have the shell, but the result is pretty similar. In my opinion.
It is extremely similar. Yeah.
So it's like it's cool, but like I don't know how relevant it is.
Yeah, if you got a pair of boots and the guy's like, yeah, no, I was only able to get like 2/3 of it or half of it is has the shell in it, and the other half like is just above the shell. Like I wouldn't be like, oh, it's going to wear differently. Like I'm not going to accept this. You would be, if the person, if the maker didn't tell you, you would never know. Yeah, most likely you would never know. Never is a dangerous word. Absolute. It's trying to do with those.
And then there was sort of this taking us way back, but one last thing I wanted to ask about before we move on is you mentioned earlier that there's sort of two more common versions of this, which is the crust version. Actually, you said you never really run it, so I guess it's not that common. And the kind of the standard version that's polished. Mm-hmm. I think everybody that's probably listening to a podcast about leather has seen like the Google image search picture of the cross section of the hide, and it's got the flesh side and the grain side, and it's denser, and there's the corium. And I think there's kind of a common perception that's out there in the world that like the more of the hide you have, the better. And especially in particular, like more grain, more better. I don't think it's necessarily that simple. Could you talk a bit about like why you tend to go for polishing the hides and like what benefits that confers?
Yeah, I mean, there's a bunch of reasons. So it makes it more cosmetically consistent. I mean, because we're kind of like we're not really sanding it. I mean, we're not like buffing it, correcting it, like getting rid of the grain. I mean, because if we were doing that, I mean, then the job is easy because you're getting rid of all the imperfections. But we're just sort of leveling it out, so it's it's like polishing. So everything is sort of filled in and more even. So you've got the canvas that you're starting with is just more consistent. But that does a lot of things also. So when you do that, it mobilizes all the waxes and oils and greases up at the surface also. So you get the crust, Chrome Excel in general, the full or the non-corrected, we would say full grain, even though it's just it's not really corrected grain when it's not full grain, has a lot more pull up. So it's a pretty striking difference, which is maybe something that's not apparent unless you see it side by side. But the regular stuff versus the stuff that we don't polish at all has more pull up. So that's a big distinction. It tends to the colors are different too. We have a little bit more of a range on colors because of that, because it lightens up a little bit when we polish it, and also the dye uptake is different. So it ends up being like a pretty different product. I mean, the wear characteristics and the physical characteristics are largely the same, but how it wears is especially how it like patinas on the surface is quite different. But that might be also because of the products that are using the non-polished crust tend to be more rugged anyway. So maybe they're getting beat on a little bit more. But I think that there's a way probably to go out and look at some of the examples side by side. I mean, I think Ben has a pair or two of the crust, the natural crust.
Yeah.
That he's beat up pretty well. And Context that run with those with Vibergs, probably with Viberg like probably 10 years ago at this point, maybe more. And then the Horsebutt is everything else. I mean, there's a lot more. There are many more examples of that.
The difference between Crust, Chrome Excel, and Chrome Excel Classic. I think the headline for me is Crust Chrome Excel having that grain. It's just pretty obvious. It's like more natural. So it's very grainy. And
Grainier.
Grainier?
Yeah.
More grainier?
More
grainier?
Yeah.
And this is
More
really
granular.
fresh. This is really fresh for me because we're celebrating the Ashland 13-year anniversary, and I actually am bringing back some Chrome Excel for this last event, and we're doing some Chrome Excel Classic navy and black, but I also have some natural Plainsman, which is AKA Crust Chrome Excel ish. Basically, yeah. It's but like the different, you wouldn't even know they're the same leather. That's how different they are. So the grain being intact completely and unaffected, and then not having any finish over the top, it's like a totally different leather. Which is
it's matte.
It's cool
and grainier, and it smells the same.
Honestly, it's like it's like really rugged in appearance compared to Chrome Excel Classic. Like it's like looking at like an open raw wood compared to like a wood that has some sort of varnish over the top, right? It's just like completely naked.
Or a difference between a sanded versus non-sanded piece of wood. I mean, like you still see all the grain, and you're not getting rid of the characteristics of the wood, but it's a lot more presentable and maybe
right
easier to picture and to make different things out of. Where if you've got something that's not sanded, I mean, there's tons of applications for that too, but maybe a little bit more rugged and not quite as versatile.
We're already kind of talking about Chrome Excel because Horsebutt, like you said, is generally getting done on like a Chrome Excel tannage. I think this is going to be another one of those leathers that a lot of people already know a lot about, and I'm just going to plug real quick here. If you go back to click back through the pages on the Horween blog to 2010, there is an article that goes really, really, really deep on Chrome Excel, and for like the standard Chrome Excel, that's kind of all the information you need to know. I suspect that that's probably where a lot of stores were pulling their copy from back in the day. But definitely worth checking out if you like need the basic scoop on Chrome Excel. But one of the things I wanted to ask you guys about is like Chrome Excel isn't just one thing, despite the kind of like hegemonic set of like sentences that appear in everybody's like product descriptions that use it. We saw just like at the time we're taping this, Viberg a couple weeks back ran a woolly Chrome Excel collection that uses this hot stuff with lanolin, which is like a natural fat derived from sheep's wool as a byproduct. But there's also like tumbled and washed Chrome Excel. And then like I've seen Cavalier sometimes referred to as its own tannage and sometimes referred to as like a variant of Chrome Excel. So can you sort of like walk us through what makes something Chrome Excel and how do all the variants fit in?
Bravo. You exposed Nick for the fraud that he is, calling everything Chrome Excel and charging a premium.
Oh no, you've exposed me.
That's a good question too, man. You're killing it.
No, it is a good question. Yeah, I mean there's a couple different ways to look at that, I guess. I mean there's Chrome Excel like Classic. Let's call it Chrome Excel Classic, which is its own thing, and like that turns into like a whole mess of different products. That turns into Chicago and Waxed Flesh and Plainsman and all the different versions of Chrome Excel with and without patterns and colors and all that stuff. And there's a ton of different options. Kudu Chrome Excel, which is something I think, Viberg did some of that recently too, but Alden being the main user of that over the last number of years. So that's all on the same base, exactly the same base,
but different finishing or different stuffing.
Right. Or different surface preparations or something, some sort of combination thereof. And then let
me help us simplify for an audience listener. It comes out of the drums the same before any hot stuff. It's tanned and retanned all the same way, and then it can be treated in different branches off after that. That's all Chrome Excel. Chrome Excel is a base tannage that can then be stuffed in a different way or finished in a different way, or both?
Yeah, everything that I just mentioned is tanned, retanned, and stuffed the same way. And once it gets stuffed, then things start to diverge a little bit. And you mentioned like Cavalier Chrome Excel, which is sort of the weird cousin. So we'll do that one last. But there's a waterproof version, which is Buccaneer, which is all the same, but just gets the retannage is a little bit different, is adjusted to be waterproof, and the stuffing blend is different. So once I've said that, all the other Chrome Excel variants sort of follow that suit.
Well, you notice that it's not called Buccaneer Chrome Excel. It's specifically called Buccaneer because it doesn't have the Chrome Excel retannage.
Yeah. I mean, I still consider it like there's Buccaneer and there's Navigator. They're the same. I mean, they're the same. I mean, I would sell them as like, oh, you want waterproof Chrome Excel? Like, this is your option. I mean, that's like, and waterproof being like, I don't like that as a selling point in leather.
If you take it to a deep sea trench, it'll probably saturate eventually.
Yeah, well, it's just like, well, I mean, how waterproof does it need to be? I mean, are you going to be standing in like a puddle? Like, do you want it to be like rubber boots waterproof, or
You haven't seen my leather waders.
yeah, or do you want it to just be you can walk through the rain and it's going to look the same when it dries as it was when it was wet? I mean, it's like there's a lot of that is based on marketing and like physical sort of ideas of how things should behave, and not necessarily in terms of like what you practically need, but that's a different podcast. But yeah, so there's that. There's a Chrome Excel called Beaufort Chrome Excel, which is regular Chrome Excel with a less rich, less oily stuffing blend. And the idea there being is that it's more likely that you can glue it. It's still tough to cement, but you can cement it. You can glue it for sneakers or whatever if you want to try to make some sneakers and not mechanically fasten. But it's different. It feels a little different. The oil content's different. And yeah, and there's a few other variations over the years, but Cavalier being probably the newest and most notable. And in that one, we adjust the retan and the stuffing blend with the idea of just like making it as blonde as possible or as light as possible so we can do bright colors. The philosophy is exactly the same. We're just, we're using a slightly tweaked tree bark blend and a slightly different wax blend, oil blend, in order to give us a lighter base so that we can do, brighter greens and yellows and reds and yeah.
Hey, since woolly Chrome Excel was mentioned, am I correct in saying that woolly Chrome Excel is the same as Chrome Excel Classic, except it has a different stuffing blend and is finished differently? It's full grain, right? It still starts off the same tannage, right?
Right. Yeah, it's a different stuffing blend. Yeah, it's the higher, lanolin or wool grease. It's more of that, which has the effect of making it darker because the wool grease is dark. It's not like the lanolin that you would see like at like that you're used to seeing. We buy the stuff that's like stuck to the bottom of the drum when they're done like cooking it. So the refined lanolin goes to like cosmetics, and like the stuff that looks like tar is the stuff that we get, which is the stuff that's good for leather. I mean, it's all good for leather, but that's the stuff that we like.
But shout out to woolly Chrome Excel. It's so nice. Your dad has some woolly Chrome Excel belts. They're like unbelievable.
Yeah, woolly Chrome Excel is awesome. The boots that I wore for the last Patina Thunderdome were woolly, and it's crazy how different they smell. Just like I would get in my car, like in the winter even, and I could smell my boots. They smell good. It's not like it's a bad smell, but it's a very sweet, like awesome smell.
Catch a little in the Midwestern car preheat.
Yeah. Oh yeah, exactly.
So you mentioned this earlier under like the subheading of a Chrome Excel kind of variant. But waxed flesh, one of the things that I wanted to kind of drill down on in particular on this one is, in my experience, and I think a lot of others from what I've heard, waxed flesh can be a lot stiffer than kind of like your classic Chrome Excel, or a little bit more rigid. And that might just be the boots it's on. But how are you going to see kind of variation between those two things other than just this is waxed flesh, so the flesh side of the leather is going to be finished instead of the grain side of the leather.
Yeah, so it has. So if we're going to talk about waxed flesh, we should talk about marine field shoe also. But so marine field shoe is effectively the base for that, which just means it's chrome excel that we're flipping over and we're using it on the suede side or the flesh side. Marine field shoe is like natural chrome excel, but we're using it on the other side. And waxed flesh is the same thing, but it's crust chrome excel on the grain side. So we don't do any polishing or anything to the grain side. And we're finishing the flesh side, so the suede side, like it's the outside of the leather. So we're adding dye coats and color and top coats, and then we're ironing it at the end and laying it down. So on the table, before you do anything to it, like it just looks like a normal piece of leather until you get close to it and you start to manipulate it, and then you sort of see that the nap has been laid totally flat. So it ages beautifully because you start to stand the nap up almost immediately when you wear it, which gives it like a very subtle, like I don't even want to say it's two-tone. It just gives it like a very interesting look, a very nice dynamic look to it, because you're getting the light is reflecting sort of off it at like all different angles instead of just one angle. But it is firmer, and that's from the flesh being finished. So normally, the classic chrome excel, the flesh is not. We don't do anything to it. It's just like a whatever the nap is, whatever the suede would look like. We just sort of leave it like that, and that's the backside of it. But if we were to do the flesh finish treatment like we do to wax flesh to any chrome excel, it would make it firmer. Just by adding more materials and ironing it again on the backside, that would make any leather firmer.
That's really interesting. So is that because then like when you're kind of bending or turning the leather, I guess if you imagine like a marching band going around a corner, the direction that's on the side that's on the outside of the turn has to travel like a further distance than the side that's on the inside of the turn. Mm-hmm. So I guess normally then like a fleshed side of the leather that's kind of looser and nappier would be allowed to just open up a little bit, whereas something with the finished side is tighter and you have to like apply more force to bend it. Is that basically what's going on?
Yes, I think I'm understanding it. That's a good example. That's what's happening to all leather when you are like when it's in the vamp, like when you're bending, when you're stepping. So the inside guys are traveling a shorter distance, but imagine all of those guys are like attached with like boards, so they can't turn at different. They can't take a different radius. They have to turn at the same because they're connected. So the inside guys that are traveling the shorter distance end up getting like all bunched together, and that's the like what causes the graininess on the top of your shoe, because it's a different distance that everything is traveling versus the outside. It's interesting. That's a good example. I like that example. I usually say it's like a phone book, like when you bend a phone book, like whatever the shorter side like ends up like getting all bunchy, but the marching band is better.
We're gonna go with the inside guys.
Yeah, I like that.
Well, I think that just the inherent nature of the material that you're applying to the flesh side, that resin finish, is just a firm material. So it's going to give you some firmness just because it's firm itself.
Yeah, it's more waxes and more material. And and the ironing too has the effect of
compact it down a little bit,
making stuff a little bit more dense. And one more thing I just thought of is one of the compelling reasons to use wax flesh is because you don't have to line it. So it tends to be thicker anyway. So maybe that's part of it too, because you don't have an upper leather and then a lining leather. You have like just the upper in some cases, especially in some of the heavier construction styles.
And then one last variant that I wanted to ask about, just because I think it's a cool bit of history, is mechanical chrome excel. So that's like the variant of chrome excel that you guys developed like way back for machine gaskets, right before like rubber was widely in use on machine gaskets. What do you need to do to get a leather to kind of meet those performance demands, and how is it like different from your mainline chrome excel? Not that I've ever seen it on a boot.
It would make cool boots. It would be beefy and rugged. So it doesn't get hot stuffed. It's the main distinction, is the main difference. So it gets a heavy vegetable retange and then it gets fat liquored instead. So it doesn't have the oil requirements, for waterproof or whatever that like a footwear leather does because of all the crazy stuff that they do through manufacturing to that product. So it's different. The main thing is like it just has to be like all that really matters is the physical characteristics. Like, is it going to hold up? So no open cuts or scratches or anything like that. But cosmetically, it's going to be inside a gasket. It doesn't matter at all, and it needs to be dense. So a lot of times it's like a double bend. So just like shoulders off, belly's off. So you have like just that part, and that's the only product that we really run that way. And we don't really run anything. Nobody really orders that anymore. It's like a tiny. There's still some applications where it's better, but it ends up being it's more complicated than just like cutting rubber and putting it inside a metal ring. I mean, if there's a whole, they cut it and you have to form it. I've actually never been to a factory that does this, but they have to cut it and they degrease it. So they like take out all the greases that we put in it, all the oils. They take all that out, and then they basically are adding in like their own like kind of like rubberizing agents, and then they put it inside this metal ring. So it's not straightforward, but so yeah. So there's
I think what they want in it, Nick, is the chrome, like the heat resistance.
In the tensile strength, yeah. So it doesn't explode like under high pressure. Yeah. Yep.
That's the only reason they're using you. Using you.
Yeah.
Or they were using you.
No, my understanding is they're under like super high pressure applications. And I was always told it was like oil rigs and stuff. That when the leather seals fail, they crack and they just leak. And they don't catastrophically fail like the rubber ones do. They just like explode and you've got stuff going everywhere. But I mean, how many of those applications are there in the world? Not many. It was my guess because we don't make very much of it. But I guess we're not the only show in town either. Well, in Chicago we are, but in general.
Yeah, I guess if you make boots, if you make shoes, this is your sign.
Well, actually, since this is the guide for Horween leather through the lens of like a boot wearer, I mean, mechanical chrome excel is like pretty badass leather. I mean, have you worn that in a shoe or a boot, Nick?
Yeah. So then the boot version of that would be natural M's, which is like a sort of like the footwear adaptation of that, which is kind of again like another like weird combination of different processes. But that's like work shoe, but chrome excel that we run on sides on steer hide.
It's awesome.
Yeah, it's awesome. So it gets but it's backwards again. So it gets chrome tanned and then it goes in the pits. So it gets some time in the pits in addition to everything else. So it gets some additional density, and the pits have that extra tree bark infusion has the effect of sort of shrinking everything up and making it more dense, but also oftentimes it gives it like a grainier, like more drawn, like sort of that spider webbing. A lot of times that's apparent, but that's also because we run on bison a lot because it's particularly gnarly and awesome on bison. So I was actually wearing those today. I have some natural M's bison boots that I was wearing today. I haven't worn them for probably 5 years. I wore them today randomly.
From your Japanese dude? The cubism stuff?
We did a bunch for him, but the pair that I was wearing today were Viberg. Yeah.
What's the name of that brand? I should know it.
Visvim.
Yeah, Visvim stuff. I remember they used to buy a bunch of that.
Yep. They did.
Come on, Visvim. Get some more M's in there.
They're still buying stuff. They've switched they've switched over to some other stuff. Yeah.
Speaking of procuring bison, Predator. This is also a combination tan leather, correct? But not a chrome excel.
Correct.
So we're moving farther away. What's that distance look like?
So Predators, that's not, I mean, in our world, that's maybe, that tange is maybe 15 years old on the outside. Yeah, that's all right. So it's Yeah, it's relatively new. But again, the materials in it and the philosophy is the same. So it has a chrome tan, and it's a combination tan. So it's like it's half veg and then half like a synthetic, like a veg retan, like resins and stuff. So that helps a lot with consistency, but also it has different performance qualities too. And then it's fat liquored. So it's its own thing. But yeah, so and the tree bark that we use in that is mimosa. So it's super traditional tree bark that gets used in a lot of different changes that we do and other people do too. So you get a good strong infusion of that that gives you the nice really patina potential. But then you get some of the more modern stuff too, which gives you like really nice performance and consistency. But the product itself is, it's a really rich, waxy leather with highs and lows in it. More so than like traditional Chrome XL. It has some pull up, but not quite as much as like classic Chrome XL. It's more matte, like sort of like a more like a smoky or like a matte surface finish, at least in the beginning. But I've seen some people that have worn that stuff hard, and it gets shiny. I mean, it's because there's a ton of wax in it and on it, so it gets really shiny over time. But that's one of those products that I'm not quite sure why we don't sell more of, because I don't know if you've heard the term or the leather crazy horse, but it's like sort of like our take on that, I guess, or like sort of one of our that was in the back of our mind as we were kind of coming up with it. I mean, I think it's better, but that's just me. But it's different. But yeah, it's a good, super hard wearing, not as heavy or as oily, but still gives you sort of everything that you would need out of like a work boot even.
I think generally like a lot of the Horween leathers that kind of we're seeing on boots fall in this space that's like not necessarily a like straight pure functionality work boot, but like not really a dress shoe either. Kind of this like amorphous heritage casual wear, like work inspired and in a lot of cases used for work, but also like nicer boots as well, kind of corner of the market. Where does Predator fall in terms of kind of the like utilitarian to like fancy boy spectrum?
I think it's been used sort of all through the spectrum. The like contractor to fancy boy, I guess we'll call it.
I love Zaid right now. He's killing me.
Yeah. I think it tends to lean towards the like more rugged, more casual side of things. And that might be because of the highs and lows in color and the way they're always there, and also the more matte finish, I think, lends itself sort of to that side of things. But I think that if you were to put that into a shoe and like put it on a burnishing wheel, you could really make it shiny. And it would look awesome.
And when that like burnishing is happening, you said earlier that's like a factor of how much wax is like in the leather.
Mm-hmm.
The actual process that's doing the burnishing, is that bringing the wax to the surface and like building up a hard layer of wax? Is it changing like the grain of the leather itself? What's changing there when you see like a Predator or a veg tan get really shiny through that burnishing process?
That's a good question. Yeah, so it's you think about a piece of leather like at a really small scale. It's not smooth. There's sort of crags and crevices, and then there's grain, possibly depending on what's been done to the surface. But the wax, when it gets shiny, what's happening is the wax is coming up to the surface, or the wax that's on the surface is being pushed, in like a really smooth layer. And it's being really evened out. It's like the same thing that happens like when you wax a car, where you're taking like a thin layer of wax, and if there are any like little tiny scratches which are making the car not shiny, you're filling everything in with a layer of wax, and you're almost like creating like a new surface that's all one surface. So that's what's happening is like you're evening everything out. And you're making it all one flat surface instead of one that has sort of at like a super close up macro view is not smooth.
Shammy is interesting to me because, as far as I know, Horween doesn't tan any like true suedes in terms of something that is a split and then that's tanned that doesn't have that grain layer in it. So Shammy is like a sort of nubuck style leather, is pretty much as close as you guys get to that, except for like stuff that's intended to be kind of used rough out or with the grain side, or sorry, with the flesh side out. What makes it special?
Yeah, so Shammy is a variation of snuff suede, which is like just our word for our nubuck. Yeah, I mean, it's a very straightforward leather. I mean, and we just make it in a very traditional, old-fashioned way. I mean, it's sort of like a no frills. I mean, it's just chrome tanned, heavy vegetable retannage that's on the lighter colored side, and then fat liquored in a way with a blend of oils and waxes that lend themselves really well to buffing. So that when you do sand it, which we do, I mean, that's a corrected leather. I mean, like it's almost like a micro suede. Like you can rub your hand on it and you can see the change in the nap, even though it doesn't really have like a true like suede nap. So a lot of it is, making something that's going to age well and feel good, but also setting it up so that it'll sand evenly and nicely. And just versatile. We can use it. We can do a ton of colors on it, like a really, really full range, from like colors that we don't like to run, like a bone, like all the way to like a jet black. Like we've done specifically for like clogs, for like the old fashioned kind of clogs, like lavender and baby blue and yellows, and like we've got a pretty good flexibility in color on those. Matte finish because it's been sanded totally. And Shammy is snuff suede that's been heavily oiled. So the color goes much darker. We don't have the flexibility in color anymore because we've surface oiled it, or effectively we've oiled it on both sides, I guess, but we've oiled it, which gives it like a different feel and a different color, and has the effect of making it very burnishable. So like if it's a shoe, like wherever your pants hit it, or if you were to brush it enough, you could almost make it into like a wax flesh looking product just by using it and burnishing it.
So I'm going to jump in about a story, since I love stories, Nick. And since we can't get Alden on the show, maybe we'll just pretend that this is the true version of the story. So I believe that Alden has been the one that has made Horween's Shammy most popular. I think they sort of single-handedly put that out into the world in like modern times. Right, Nick? I mean, it's been around for a while, but they started doing some stuff with different Alden retail stores for the grain side. And Shammy is what is known in the world as an oiled nubuck leather, and that's Horween's version of an oiled nubuck. I think what happened was Alden got a shipment in of their intended for the grain Shammy and used it on the other side, which is much more nappy. It's much more of a coarse nap, the flesh side. And they made it for a sample for the store, and the store sold a run of it, and people loved it. And I bet you there was a time where they tried to do it again. They couldn't figure out what the hell was going on. And then they realized I don't know if this is true, if they intentionally cut it upside down or not, but the result was certainly great. So if they intentionally did that, it was awesome. So you may have seen like Earth, Shammy, Alden stuff. It's awesome.
Tobacco, yeah.
Mm-hmm. So it's really great. If people haven't seen how Shammy looks, especially the rough out Shammy, take a look at some of those Alden foes. It's a really sweet leather. And the one you kind of hinted at this, Nick, too. What's special about your oiled nubuck is how it ages. Even just the snuff suede itself without the oil, it seems like whatever you're doing in that veg retan, it just makes it get better and better, like all your stuff, which is more unique. It's a little less common to find a nubuck or a suede that develops like yours does.
Your Alden story is, I think, mostly right.
Yeah.
I think the way I heard it,
purpose?
the way I heard it was that yeah, they ordered it and they made a pair of shoes out of it. And it was like, you got to come see these shoes. I don't think they're right. And the person that made the shoes inside out was ready to like get
Fired or whatever.
fired. And then they were looking at the shoes and they're like, these are amazing. Like, why didn't we try this sooner? So I think that the initial round of shoe, or the initial sample, was made incorrectly inside out. And the result was good enough that they use it. I think they use it almost exclusively that way. They may have done some like saddle Oxfords where they used chamois both ways. Like the saddle was grain out and the shoe was, or the vamp and the rest of the shoe was fleshed out, which are pretty, I think I saw those. Those are pretty cool. But yeah, mostly, which is kind of, to me, kind of a shame because the grain burnishes like crazy and is really nice too. But again, I don't know if I'm not making the shoes.
For my taste, if you want a suede or like a nubuck look, just go all the way. Like get real shaggy. Maybe not like not sanded shaggy, like where it's just hairy. Like, but I think a nap is cool in the same way that a wax flesh is cool. Like you want to see some character. And I think a nubuck is like a little too close to a grain for me. Or it is grain, but it's a little too micro suede-y. I don't know. I want some nap. That's what I'm trying to say.
You know, Timberland would disagree with you since they've sold about 17 billion pairs of those like peanut
I
suede
will admit that I am
Timberland
wrong.
boots.
This is just to my taste, Nick. I'm just saying, like, like I actually got those. Did I tell you about some Air Jordans a year ago, and I just opened them, and they actually have a pretty good nap. And I think if they were too fine of a nap, I think it would be really boring. It would look like not leathery, you know. So there's something about like a really fine nap or a really fine suede that's not as exciting to me.
That's different though than like a loafer or a, you know, some sort of derby or Oxford. Like you might want it to be a little bit finer.
I guess I'm not.
Depends on what you're.
I guess I'm not an 80-year-old man.
I don't think I am either.
Do you like those styles?
Do I?
Yeah.
I do, yeah.
I can't pull them
off. I'd never have an occasion to wear them because I work in a tannery, but I like them.
You're just being political when you say that, though. You have to.
I mean, we don't even make this stuff, so I don't know how that's the case.
All right, never mind.
That's a different tannery. I still like it though.
I'm just gonna go big or go home.
A wall of loafers.
Yeah, I actually don't own a single pair of loafers. Having said that, but
you know what? The Grant Stone guys insist that Josh and Wyatt, who'd been on the show before, insist that loafers are their absolute favorite things to wear. And every time I see them, they're wearing loafers. You know what? I get it. It's not my thing, but I know a lot of people love loafers and they look awfully comfortable. So
there's some sauce in this Grant Stone.
Not throwing shade. What's that?
I think there's something to those Grant Stone ones, like running it on a kind of boot style last, as opposed to like the kind of really, really slim down European style things. You're getting into different territory there. It's like, I don't know. I think something that more people can get behind than the kind of like super, super low profile stuff.
Yeah. Zaid, what's your opinion on socks with loafers?
Socks with loafers. I can go either way on it. On a personal level, I'm like a totally like boots in the house kind of person, and so from that perspective, like I like my layers. But I think it depends on the socks. I mean, if you're like, you know, breaking out your boot socks, it's gonna look a little awkward. But and the bare ankle thing can look fine too if that's your vibe. But I don't know. I probably lean in the socks direction.
Yeah, I'm with you. Yeah,
I'm a gross Yeti foot kind of guy.
The more I wear socks, the less I can not wear socks. With anything. I made the old man move where like I was wearing a pair of boat shoes, like deck shoes, out to a restaurant, and I like put a pair of socks in my pocket. I'm like, I'm probably gonna want these later.
That might be too far for me personally.
No, I put them on. I'm not ashamed. I put them on.
It's not a boat shoe, but it is a leather. Essex. As I understand it, this is basically the same set of lacquers that's used on shell cordovan, but in a vegetable tanned cowhide. Do I have that right?
Yeah. It's the same tree bark blend that we use in the pits. We use that blend sort of in a different combination, you know, with cowhide or steerhide being the main, you know, or one of the main differentiations, but also it doesn't get hot stuff. It gets fat liquored. It gets an emulsified oil blend, and yeah, and then it's not the veg tan base is different also, but yeah, but the tree barks are the same. So you get similar aging quality in terms of how it changes color and yeah, that's about it, I guess.
Color and luster.
Yeah.
It's shocking to me how dissimilar Essex is from cordovan because it's so much less dense. At least the original, which I think you may be doing some experiments with again, Nick, but the original Essex, here's my story, Zaid. I came into work one day. Skip had his mad scientist hat on, like all wide-eyed. He's like, oh my God, look what he's like, you got to come look at this. And he had a wild idea to take a steer hide and put it alongside the cordovan in the pits. And, you know, he had done this obviously like a month or two earlier, and it was finally done. So he pulls me aside and shows it to me, and it was awesome. But it was like 5 times the mass of a normal side. It was just so dense and heavy. It was awesome. So are you running experiments like that again, Nick?
Kind of. We're running experiments with some of the weaker liquors because we've got, when we tan the cordovan after, you know, the first 3 days or the second 3 days, the liquor itself, we call it spent liquor. So it doesn't have, I mean, a lot of the tree barks have ended up in the cordovan. And so we're left with this liquid that's, you know, not really useful to us anymore. But we're trying to figure out, like, well, what can we use that at all? Like, if we were try to tan with that, like, how long would we have to leave a piece of Essex in there before it, you know, it took up what was left? Because it's very weak. So I mean, instead of 30 days, it could take 75 days just to get sort of like to extract the last few bits of tree bark, you know, the tans that are in there. So that's what we're trying right now. It's not
okay.
We'll see.
Yeah, it was too much before. It was just like literally like a stone. I don't know. It was just so heavy.
It was like very weighty, like not thickness, but like you put it on a scale, it was like 3 times heavier than like a normal.
Yeah. It was
like a normal piece of leather, but.
So it made it like impractical for most things, which is why they changed it. But that was sort of the origin of Essex. Was Nick's dad had a crazy idea, and it's amazing they didn't have this idea decades earlier. You know, I mean, we identified the year, Nick, right? It was like 2007 or 8 or something.
So, yeah, something like around then.
Yeah. So it was like relatively recent that leather came about, and now it's a really popular thing that you do.
Yeah, it's a nice blend of. It's unusual to have a veg that's that versatile. I think because it ends up being pretty soft. I think a lot of people think of a pure veg as something that's pretty stiff, especially in the beginning, and that leather tends to be pretty comfortable and flexible, at least when you're comparing it to other things like some of the other traditional veg tanners would make, like a Wickett and Craig as like it's a completely different leather with a different set of applications. Just firmer, just different.
And do those similarities carry through to the finishing process? Are you like getting the Essex under the glazing jack and like really, really like how close does it track to cordovan in that process?
We can. We don't usually. Usually it gets there's some crossover. It gets ironed, like it gets a smooth plating, like a mirror plating, which the cordovan does too, and that's where a lot of the luster is coming from. But glazing is tricky sometimes because if it's all based on friction. So if you have a leather that's overly waxy or sort of the friction is different on the surface, it ends up just like pulling the whole thing out of your hands, which is bad for everybody. It's bad for the leather. It's just bad for everybody. It doesn't. You usually end up with like a dark, really dark mark on the leather, and so it ends up being. There are some leathers we still do that with, but mostly, especially something like the Essex, it actually is better to not do that in most cases.
And I guess I should back up. That's like basically that process is a glass roller that gets pulled back and forth over the leather, kind of like a mechanical arm. Is that?
Yeah, it's like a fixed glass rod. Yeah.
It's cool to look at if anybody's doing the split screen thing.
Yeah, it's cool.
Google.
Yeah, they do it to, you can also see it. They do it to alligator too, but they have like these little teeny tiny glazing jacks.
Really?
They're cute.
Yeah. They don't use
Honestly,
glass
it looks completely horrifying the first time you see it because it looks like somebody's gonna lose an arm, but
Get horribly injured.
yeah, I mean it's pretty safe. Like there's this guard. As long as you don't put your hand in there, you're fine. So you just don't. Like it's pretty easy to just not put your hand somewhere.
There's a very clear. There's like it's called a bolster, which is just like a rectangular, long, skinny rectangular piece of leather, which the arm with the glazing jack only goes down that arm. So just don't put anything in that spot other than leather, and everything will be fine.
Yeah.
So what do those bolsters turn out like after being under a glazing jack for like 10 years? That's just
awesome.
Insane.
Yeah. I mean, we glaze with them until they like disintegrate. They get compacted by so much, but yeah, they're just veg tanned, super dense pieces of veg tan. Yeah.
They're just super patinaed. Yeah.
Yep. I mean, everything in our building is like had like rubber or not rubber. Jeez, cut that out. Has had leather rubbed over it like a million times. Like even the tables, like the
tables are awesome.
The tables that we push the leather around on, like they just start out as like Home Depot grade, like cheap wood, and then after like a year, they look like you like brought them up off the Titanic or something. They're like
true.
Dark brown and like totally smooth and like beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
That does actually make me wonder what happens if you get like vegetable tannins on like something that's made out of wood. Does it like, I don't know, it's like some kind of super like reinforced. That's probably not how it works at all chemically, but
yeah, no, I don't. I mean, that's a good question. I don't know.
It's kind of like a good cue for me to remind from the last episode we did. We had Nick's tanner, one of the tanners on, and we were talking about what is a tannage and how does that all work. A veg tanning is kind of like already wood. So it might be like irrelevant to try to introduce that to another piece of wood. But that reminds me of, if people are watching right now, we need to have Esteban for another episode, and we still need questions for him that relate to finishing. So if anybody has any finishing questions for a tanner.
Yeah, or anything we may have missed or people might want to know more about. I don't think we missed anything given how thorough Esteban is, but yeah, because I did see some questions in the comments in the video, which we can talk about. But yeah, I don't know.
Did we make a good guide here for Horween leather as it relates to boots? Because I wonder if like people are gonna have more. Like every episode we do is like, man, people are gonna be more confused now. Is like this was not concise at all.
Stuff they have to think about now that they didn't have to think about before.
I think a good way that I can summarize a lot of this that Nick has presented in the past is like, there's been enough years that have passed with Nick's materials that you can probably, and with the internet being so amazing right now, you can probably just Google search for the leather that you're curious about and find what it looks like after a year of use, 5 years of use, and just see if that's something that you're into. And then I would just use that and compare it to other tanneries, other leathers that Nick makes, and just see what kind of future you like. And I mean, it's very personal because like Nick and I could have the same pair of wax flesh, for example, but we would wear them completely differently and treat them differently. So it's a little bit personal too, but at least you can get a sense of how the things are going to progress. There's one thing I wanted to mention from earlier because I was thinking about this conversation most of the day today, or some of the day today. And I knew we were going to ask about Chrome Excel. I've just noticed this. I was trying to think about my experience with Chrome Excel. And it really feels like all my favorite stuff is Chrome Excel. And I was like trying to figure out why. And it's not like to shill Nick or any of that sort of stuff, but I just feel like there's something about it that is more comfortable somehow. And I don't know if I've isolated enough variables to know that, but it really does feel like there's something to it that makes it more comfortable. So there's that, right? There's some hidden secret in Chrome Excel that I can't describe.
It's versatile. I mean, it can be dressy or casual, and I mean, and I am a shell for my own stuff, of course, but not to say that it's like, the only thing that you should own. But I do think it's versatile, and I think that it's available in enough different ways and enough different places that it's a good. I mean, I think Nick from Stride was saying it's like a very good starting point, because it's available to you in a wide range of products at a wide range of prices, so you can really decide. Like if you like the way that it looks, like there are a bunch of different options, but.
Why is it so
you
comfortable?
Said something.
Is it
you
comfortable?
said something, and I was going to say something. I can't remember. What were you saying just before this?
I was saying it was comfortable.
No, before that, before the Chrome Excel thing.
Oh, I was talking about Esteban questions. Let's rewind the tape. I don't remember.
I was going to say something. I got.
Well, I don't know if we want to cut this out, but like I have a couple shell things. The main of one of which is those Viberg plain toes, and I like them an awful lot. But I can't tell if, again, isolating variables. Like I can't tell if the Viberg midsoles are just too damn dense and thick, or if the shell is a little too inflexible, or what. But they're not as comfortable as literally all my other Chrome Excel stuff, most of which tend to be Alden. So it's like I don't know if I've identified enough variables in there, but I don't know. Chrome Excel's comfort supreme for me.
Yeah, it's stretchy, or it has some stretch to it, which the manufacturer has to manage because of the way it's dried. But that's what gives it the feel and the density and the comfort, in part.
Yeah.
That is one of the cool things about it, though, because like you guys at the tannery take the leather up to a certain point, but then really how it ends up being used in the final application, and then how that final product that it gets made into ends up being like used in somebody's everyday life, can take the same leather in a lot of very, very different directions. So one of the fun things with Chrome Excel is because it's been used so much on so many different things, you can see examples of it out there that like are from a huge range of applications that look totally different, that have like aged differently, that have been clicked differently, that have been put through different processes. Whereas like on a leather that doesn't show up as much, you might not get to see that, and you might have to just sort of find out for yourself. There is something to be said for that.
Yeah, I know. I remember. I was going to say, because you were saying, Phil, you can go and find pictures of stuff, and the Patina project app from Stitchdown is actually. I actually use that. I will go through that and be like, I wonder what that looks like. I mean, you can go through and you can search Chrome Excel in the app, and it'll show you like all of the pairs that have gone through whatever Thunderdome Psycho is.
That's awesome.
Under his boots. Yeah, it's awesome. It's great. It's a good spot to start if you are looking for how someone's going to age, or what the color is going to be, or who might have made something one way or the other. I like it.
Yeah. Well, and if we're doing a round of plugs, Josh for Stitchdown a while back wrote a couple stories just on how different leathers age, mostly pulling like Patina project photos. So you can see like the day one, month one, month six transformation on like a bunch of pairs of natural Chrome Excel boots or a bunch of pairs of shell boots all in one place. Those photos tend to be sort of more dramatic. Like don't take that as a guarantee for what your boots are going to look like in 6 months, because some of those Thunderdome people are like,
sure, yeah,
you're real serious about it. But there's also like way back on the early days, somewhere on the Stitchdown site, like these like GIF images of like that I think were pulled from Standard and Strange, of like a pair of boots that like morphs between the pictures. And it's like not to outbend a little bit here, it looks a little bit like a kind of like PowerPoint transition from like it's not high-end Hollywood digital effects, but it's cool to sort of see it in one place, just go through that loop again and again.
Yeah, get it together, Ben. Go back and fix that stuff.
Stop gallivanting. And
yeah.
Yeah, did we miss? I guess, the only thing we didn't talk about was like Dublin, which is just Essex with wax on it to get it, which makes it darker and more pull up. And Phil likes Dublin. Phil can talk about Dublin.
Yeah, I think it's my understanding, and at least when I was working with you, Nick, Dublin was the most popular iteration of that tannage of Essex. And you can finish Essex with an oil finish, which the final product is called Essex, or you can finish Essex with a wax finish, and that final product is called Dublin. So they're pretty similar except for the wax versus oil. I think it gives it a little bit of density. I like a hard wax on the surface because it doesn't like make it the leather impervious, but if you scratch it or scuff it, you have more opportunity to cure the effect of a scratch by just melting the wax back into place. So for my purposes, making wallets, my customers really like that. I have a pair of Dublin shoes that look, well, to Nick's point from like the first thing we talked about, is they look better today than they did originally. And you could not tell if that was scratched because I just melted them all back into place. So Dublin's kind of magical for that reason. I tend to like how it looks very, especially with the Dublin version, how it looks very wooden in particular colors. It like really somehow translates as wood to a lot of people's eyes. And I think they like that. And then it, of course, develops a great patina. So it's by far our most popular leather at Ashland Leather Company, but we're only doing small leather goods and not boots. And I find it a little bit upsetting. And I tell all the boot makers that we have on the show, you should make more Dublin stuff. And they're like, yeah. And they just don't. I'm like kind of surprised I don't see more of it. And then I've been telling people this as if I'm some sort of Nostradamus. I think the next hit is going to be Cypress, which we're starting to see a little bit more of, which is sort of a crossover. Like it's a tougher, more resilient version of Dublin because it is a chrome based tannage with the veg retan and then the wax on the top. I've worn some products in Cypress and you can't defeat it. It really wants to take a beating and you just blend in those scratches. So I would encourage some boot makers or even just individual makers making for themselves, check out some Cypress. I think that's a special leather that Nick is doing.
Yeah, it's similar to Dublin only in the wax department. Like it's completely different, but it has in the initial makeup and everything, it looks very similar because of the
like
table, we would say.
It's even more dense than Dublin too because of the chrome, which is ironic because I think a lot of people think of a chrome tan leather as inherently softer. Somehow that Cypress I register as quite dense.
Yeah, the retanage is different. Yeah, it gives it a little bit different.
It's awesome.
Yeah, it's light. It's not. I mean, Essex is still. We talk about the initial trials. It's just heavier. Like if you were to put it on a scale, Essex is still heavier than Cypress or Dublin. I mean, it's still heavier than Cypress, but
really
very nice. It's good. But yeah, I think that I did want to say after we just talked about the stuff that I make for like how long? 2 hours. That it doesn't really matter what we do unless like someone can cut it and sew it into something. So that's not lost on me either. I mean, like we're selling the stuff by the square foot, and then someone has to actually get it and cut it and click it and make sure the patterning is right and making sure they're cutting the right parts out of the right parts of the boot out of the right part of the hide and all that stuff. And that is and they're taking what we do and they're combining with a bunch of other stuff. And like, that's no small feat either. Feet, no pun intended. I did not do that on purpose. Yeah. I think that I would encourage people to like go look around at a lot of different makers and see how everyone does things differently.
It's not all just, a boot. This is a bit of a tangent, but I was earlier today down at the Smithsonian Archives, because I live in DC, and I was kind of trawling because they have a ton of boot records for the projects I'm working on. And they have in one of their collections a bunch of old clippings from like shoemaking trade magazines from like the 1920s and 1930s. And they're just like 20 or 30 or 40 page articles on just like how to click better, 20 or 30 or 40 page articles on just like how to improve the quality of your lasting on a McKay weld process if you're using staples. Like
Wow.
the kind of the vast amount of knowledge that was like produced, because this is like, it's something people have done for all of human history. Kind of, if you're like at a certain point you have to wear shoes, and everybody, if they can get them, has to wear shoes. So this is something that like so many people have put kind of an inordinate amount of thought into. It's crazy to see it on paper because you don't see that much anymore.
Man, you inspired me to go to the Smithsonian and read that. That sounds amazing. Like I would sit there and read that for a week.
I was literally there for like 5 hours today, and I'm gonna reach out to them again and order more boxes.
I had an image in my head of like the manufacturers in the 20s, like subscribing to these magazines and like leaving them in the break rooms and like being like, that's all there is to read. You got to read how to get better at what you're already doing.
Well, some of these like shoe companies ran like internal magazines that were like just for their staff, where like everybody every once a month gets like a copy of like United Shoe Machine Monthly in the mail if you work there. And it's like stuff on how to do it better, but also like lifestyle stuff. It's crazy. Some of this.
Did we miss anything?
Yeah, you feel good about writing what you're going to write?
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I actually
seems like a lot.
I mean, it's just a matter of like trawling back through and like pulling out kind of the specific details. Oh, actually,
Chrome pack.
Chrome pack. Yep, you beat me to it.
Yeah, kind of like Chrome Excel.
Kind of like different. Everything else we just talked about.
Kind of like Chrome Excel, but not really though. So it's same kind of philosophy, except it gets there's no veg in the retange. It's a straight chrome retange, which changes how it feels and ages, as you would imagine, but also makes it way stronger because the chrome in the case of many leathers that we've been talking about does a lot to increase tensile strength and heat resistance. So for manufacturing and also just for everyday wear, that can often be advantageous. So it's straight chrome. The stuffing blend is different. It's a heavier, oilier, waxier blend than like classic Chrome Excel. And it gets dried on glass, like pasted against glass instead of hanging up. So it doesn't shrink at all. So there's a lot less stretch. So we have talked about it, and it's like Chrome Excel classic, but like on steroids. Like you can do a lot of bad things to it and it doesn't really care.
Chrome Excel.
Yeah.
Pretty much. Yeah.
Yeah. It's good. But it's not maybe. I mean, aesthetically not as versatile because it tends to be oilier and more of a matte finish, but yeah, different, firmer.
One of the things I was talking to Ben about is we're working on like kind of like a get oriented sort of article or maybe like reference framework that's like if you're new to boots and you're just like are totally overwhelmed, this is the information you need to like figure out what's going on. So one of the articles we're kind of doing for that is actually taking your Shoecast episode, Phil, from like the dawn of time. That's like this is how the process works. So I spent like a couple days a while back just like sunk in like that and like some other like inside film like stuff from different tanneries, just like
hopefully you didn't fact check me too hard. No, I'm pretty sure it was decent information. But I remember talking to Ben about that. It's like nobody knows. How would you know this stuff? And like to me it's always like the so what? It's like who cares? So I try to distill it. But yeah, people should listen to that episode if they want to know like the whole scope of like, here's how you start with a hide and here's how you end with something that's ready for a boot.
Well, and it is like, I don't know, you talk about the so what, but like there is something to being able to see like, I don't know, on a website somewhere or reading something out in the world, like Merriam, vegetable tan, T-core, shell in, horsebutt, I don't know what, just like this string of proper nouns that sounds like either some kind of like code speak
it's
or
crazy,
like incantation, and like actually take all that down into the pieces and understand what it means and then what it means for you and what you care about and what you don't. Like There's
Yeah, you're right.
do it.
That's because it's just like we talked about Chrome Excel for maybe an hour today, and that's because it's so nuanced. Like there's so many versions, and that's why there are all these different names that Horween has to change the name every time they make the product a little different, so they know how to reproduce it. Right? It's and it's endless. That's the problem. Is there's no end to what Chrome Excel could be. There could be a Zaid Chrome Excel tomorrow. You know?
Waiting for the debut. Yeah, if I've learned anything, the tanning is just really complicated. It's really complicated.
It's chemistry. I mean, there's a lot more science in it than even I remember sometimes. And talking to Esteban, I mean, he's in it. I mean, he loves chemistry, so he thinks about it, and yeah, there's a lot. It's not just. I mean, the vegetable, the pit tanning is like a little bit less technical. It's because it's just like you've got these materials and you just sort of go for as long as it needs to go, and then you just like add a little extra time just to make sure it's long enough. I mean, it's like it's not as scientific. At least it wasn't, whatever, 1,000 years ago when they started veg tanning, like in burying hides in the ground with oak bark chips. But it's especially today with all of the different extracts and syntans and resins and waterproofing oils, and it's just like a million different combinations of anything. So it's complicated.
It's true. Well, right on. I'm going to wrap it up for us. I guess sometimes we do favorites at the end of the show. I guess I'm just going to make everybody's favorite and ask you if you have been watching the Olympics. Have you seen any Olympics, guys? No?
I haven't watched any Olympics. It's
How about
usually I'm really into it.
How about Gojira? Did you watch the opening ceremonies with Gojira playing okay, do you know who Gojira is?
I do.
It's like this French metal band, and the reason it's interesting is it's the first time ever that there's been a metal band at the opening ceremony for the Olympics. You just watch the video; it's so badass.
Yeah, that's crazy.
So I recommend.
Are you sure you're calling the right people? Did you need to call Gojira?
Check it out, man. It's crazy. They're like, just watch it. And then the other thing, if you are going to watch an event, man, skateboarding is really fun to watch. So I just throw that out there for you. It's pretty cool.
Oh, I will go back and I'll probably watch a lot of it once it's not even on anymore. I just haven't. The last couple weeks have been crazy, but
yeah, man,
it's fun.
It doesn't seem to be the consensus take, but I do kind of think the Winter Olympics are just a bit more exciting. That's where they pack in all the crazy stuff, like ice climbing. I
like winter too. Yeah, it's because I like skiing, and Shaun White was really neat to watch snowboard, and there's the biathlon. Like, yeah, I think I'm a winter guy too.
Different, yeah.
Like, go ski a bunch and then shoot some shit.
Yeah.
It's like, who came up with this? Although I did watch...
Of course, someone in Scandinavia came up with that, of course. Because we're doing that anyway. We'll win this one for sure.
A day in the life.
Yeah.